Generation 1 of Pokémon without a doubt has the most iconic lineup of Pokémon in the history of the franchise. It has such well-known and beloved mons like Charizard, Jigglypuff, Snorlax, Gyarados, Eevee, Mewtwo, and everyone's favorite, Seal. But you know which Gen 1 Pokemon I think deserves more positive attention? The cicada nymph whose body has succumbed to the control of the parasitic fungi growing on their back and is now a lifeless husk. I love Parasect. They're a terrifying but very creative concept for a Pokemon in my opinion, giving homage to the Cordyceps fungi, many of which are parasitic towards bugs. I love their dead but content expression with a lack of pupils, and I also love the beautiful bright red color of the mushroom until they ruined it in Gen 6 to 8 by replacing it with this ugly pale pink. Sadly, it seems like a lot of Pokemon fans are a bit too creeped out with this one to enjoy it. It's pretty understandable since you're basically raising a zombie, but while I do feel terrible for Parasect, they really fascinate me as a Pokemon. There are a lot of mons out there well known for being unsettling, such as Drifloon, who carries children away if they mistake Drifloon for a real balloon, Hypno, who has the power to hypnotize and put people to sleep almost instantly and is infamous for kidnapping a child hypnotized, Typhlosion. Pokemon with dark undertones like this make their universe really come to life more, as it's really interesting to see the light and dark sides of Pokemon and learn more of what they are and what they're truly capable of, which is why I appreciate Parasect as much as I do. Unfortunately, probably an even bigger reason why a lot of people don't like Parasect is because of their performance in battle. There are naturally a ton of Pokemon who will underperform in battle compared to most others. But then there's the Parasect line with its bug grass typing. If you're a bug grass type, you're weak to 6 types, including 2 4x weaknesses. And Parasect's base stats are nowhere near good enough to make up for being so vulnerable, which is why I think they truly deserve a new evolution. This is Paraspector, a fan-made evolution for Parasect made by Reddit user u/woodsman, where the mushroom on Parasect's back has not only taken full control of them, but has also formed a new body for itself from the nutrients of Parasect. They were basically given the Annihilate treatment, or a Pokemon that was previously a final evolution is given new evolution where it gains the Ghost type. In this case, I think Paraspector would be Ghost Grass, since the insect's body is pretty much gone. I absolutely love this idea, and cannot think of a better evolution idea if I tried. Thank you very much u/Woodsman for this creation, and thanks to Parasect for the effort they give, whether it be conscious or not. And that was just the prologue to this video. Greetings guys, gals, and ghost types. My name is Grantypoo, and I love Pokemon, and thankfully most of the planet does too. There are lots of really iconic and beloved Pokemon, as well as some that are near universally hated. But today, I want to talk about some of my potentially unpopular Pokemon opinions. There are some Pokemon that I really like and the internet seems to really like to endlessly complain about, as well as some that get a lot of positive attention while I just can't stand them. If you disagree with any of my opinions in this video, it's totally fine. I just want to give some appreciation to Pokemon who really don't get much, as well as wanting to vent some frustration I have with certain Pokemon without wanting to ruin them for people who like them. In this video, I'm ranking these Pokemon mainly based on how much I don't understand their popularity or unpopularity, and even though a common reason for a Pokemon to be liked or disliked is how good they are in competitive battling, I'm primarily basing my opinions off of their design, personality, and characteristics, since that's what matters more to me in a Pokemon overall. I'm also going to alternate back and forth between Pokemon I like and dislike, with the next entry of the list being negative, and the final entry being positive, since I don't want to end the video on a negative note. While we're at a negative entry, there will be a red number on the corner of the screen indicating where we're at, while the positive entries will have a green number. Finally, to get a better understanding of what the general consensus of these Pokemon are, I created a survey in Google Forms that lets viewers select how much they like each Pokemon and a list of ones I selected, as well as give any extra thoughts on them if they want. I also used ChatGPT and Liner to ask how much Pokemon fans like some of the ones I considered using. Hey everyone, this is just an editor's note. I couldn't do a better understanding that generative AI is highly damaging to the environment due to high energy consumption, use of resources, and waste generation. So I feel I need to apologize and express that I do feel bad about using it for this video. I started using these chatbots for this video earlier in its development in order to not have to rely only on looking at a bunch of social media posts, Google form answers, and other web pages just to get a stronger understanding of what the general opinions towards certain Pokemon are. But nevertheless, I'm resolving to avoid using generative AI machines as much as I can moving forward, and will only use it when I really feel the need to, such as if I can't easily get an answer I'm looking for from Google or asking people on r/ask Reddit. Thanks for listening, and let us continue with the list. Since there's a lot more Pokemon out there that I feel are underrated rather than ones I think are overrated, it was a lot harder for me to decide on Pokemon for the negative side of the list, hence why there are only 4 negative entries instead of 5 like the positive ones. People may complain that Charizard gets too much attention and pampering by Game Freak, and while I agree, I still think Charizard looks pretty cool and holds up well overall. Rapid Strike Urshifu is a different situation. They're decently popular but not super popular, which might make you question why I decided to include them in the list. But I chose to do it anyway, because Rapid Strike Urshifu might be my least favorite Pokemon of all time. To properly introduce this thing, let me take you back in time to the Isle of Armor DLC from Pokemon Sword and Shield. Here, you are gifted the legendary Pokemon Cupfu, a martial artist bear cub that evolves into a different form of Urshifu depending on which scroll you decide to pursue on the Isle. The Scroll of Darkness will evolve Cupfu into Single Strike Urshifu, a fighting dark type which specializes in fewer but bigger blows in battle. Already I take issue with this evolutionary line since it feels fairly derivative of another line from 2 gens before it, the Pancham line. They're both 2-stage lines about a pure fighting type bear cub that evolves into a fighting dark type adult bear. Even their colors aren't too far off. But then there's Rapid Strike Urshifu, which you get by obtaining the Scroll of Waters. They gain the water type instead of the dark type, learn 2 water type moves instead of dark type moves, and fight in a different pose. That's basically it. There's no difference in base stats between the 2 forms, they have the same ability, and they look almost exactly alike. It's literally the same model with just a few slight alterations to their fur and headbands. How the Frigibax are they a fighting water type but Clobbopus and Graploct aren't? They're even found near water in game. I don't know much about martial arts, so I don't know how much clothes matter to martial artists depending on their fighting styles, but even waterbenders from Avatar: The Last Airbender typically wear blue to signify their fighting style. I also think it's ironic that in the base game of Pokemon Sword and Shield, Toxtricity, the evolution of the Pokemon Toxel, has 2 forms depending on its personality, or nature as it's called in-game, and they look quite different from each other. But in a paid expansion DLC in the same game, the mascot of the adventure has hardly any difference in their design. Sure, the forms of Urshifu are colored differently when they transform into their Gigantamax forms, but you're not gonna see that most of the time, especially since we've moved on to Gen 9 and the age of Dynamax and Gigantamax is over. I already really don't like Rapid Strike Urshifu for how derivative and poor of an excuse of an alternate form I think it is. But what truly made me despise this thing was actually having to fight it. This mon used to be the bait of my existence in online fights and Pokemon Showdown back in the day. Their signature move, Surging Strikes, is a base 25 power water type move that hits 3 times in a row. That wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that each of those hits are always critical. That means you're going to get hit by a multi-hitting move that has a base power of almost 120. The point of critical hits is that you have a rare chance of dealing extra damage to an opponent. Some moves like Slash or Razor Leaf have a higher chance of being critical, but when you make an attack that's always critical, you have to ask what the point of the system is at this point. And then there's Urshifu's signature ability Unseen Fists, which lets them break through protection moves with attacks that make physical contact. Imagine having your Umbreon out in battle holding the leftovers item and the opponent sends out Urshifu. You use Detect to protect yourself so you have an extra turn to heal a little with the leftovers before switching to something that's not weak to fighting. But Urshifu says nope and one-shots your Umbreon with close combat. Even the way this form moves in battle annoys me. They try to look really flowy like water, but it just looks obnoxious, like, ooh, I'm so smooth like a river, just get the hell out of here. The competitive scene of Pokemon Sword and Shield was kind of a dumpster fire thanks to Pokemon like this and Zacian and the Dynamax gimmick in general. And while we have plenty of Pokemon nowadays that are annoying to fight, I'm really glad this era is over. And I know at the beginning of the video I said I wasn't going to focus much on the competitive aspects of Pokemon when rating them, but this one had to be an exception since Rapid Strike Urshifu insults me so much on multiple levels, and I've hardly heard anyone complain about them over the years. Sorry if that rant was a bit much for being so early in the video, I just really wanted to vent my frustration about my least favorite Pokemon. Thankfully, it's finally time for the next positive entry. Prepare yourselves everyone, because next we have what I like to call the Unova monkeys, comprised of Pansage and Simisage, Pansear and Simisear, and Panpour and Simipour. I know these are a lot of mods for one slot on the list, but they are all in a trio of evolutionary lines, and they share a lot of the same complaints from Pokemon fans. Each line has its own type, grass, fire, and water, which wouldn't seem strange until you realize is the exact same trio of types as the starter Pokemon of each region, which may make some people wonder what the point of these monkeys are. The bottom stages of each line are in fact used in the first Pokemon Gym of the Unova region, where they are used to teach the player about type matchups by purposefully sending the type of monkey that's strong against the starter Pokemon you chose. But the designs of the monkeys, especially the evolved forms of each line, is what a lot of people really seem to like to hate on. They might complain about how over-exaggerated or silly their features are, or that the monkeys look too similar to each other. But personally, the only one of their designs I take significant issue with overall is Simisear. They have a weird squash-shaped torso, and while in theory carrying over the cute sheepish facial expression of their pre-evolution should be neat, it just looks a bit awkward in execution. But before I talk about these designs more, I would love to give a shout out to the PokeTuber The Rogue Renegade. In their video, My Unpopular Pokemon Opinions, they have an entire section dedicated to defending the Unova monkeys, where they explain that the bottom stage monkeys are based on the 3 wise monkeys, who represent the values of speaking no evil, hearing no evil, and seeing no evil, which is nicely represented with their hand and eye expressions. The final stage monkeys represent what happens when each of these monkeys succumb to their respective evil, and each of them take on the form of a Japanese delinquent to represent that. This may sound like a strange decision to some of those who know that the Unova region is based on New York and the United States, but what many people may not know is that when creating this region, Game Freak took a lot of inspiration from the fact that New York is a highly diverse area, and it's why several Pokemon in the Unova region take inspiration from various cultures, including the starters. Simipour is apparently based on Kogals. Wait, is that what they're saying? Hold on. Okay, Kogals, thanks ChatGPT. They're a Japanese fashion trend characterized by young women wearing flashy outfits, dyed hair, and a rebellious or stylish attitude. They're pretty much obsessed with their appearance, and Simipour's design really reflects it with their skirt-shaped torso and the frill-like white marking on the top. The fact that Simipour's line represents See No Evil also fits this notion pretty well. Meanwhile, Simisage may be based on gangsters with pompadour hairstyles, at least according to Renegade. I was curious about exactly which group they were talking about, so I looked at pompadours on Google Images, and luckily found quite a few pictures of Japanese men that looked like the ones in Renegade's video. One of them led me to a Reddit post, where some of the comments reveal that this was an example of the Bosozoku culture, which according to Wikipedia is a Japanese youth culture associated with customized motorcycles. These people have made themselves infamous for riding in large groups, running toll booths, dodging the police, and smashing cars and threatening violence upon those who disapproved of them or got in their way. Bosozoku became the highest form of youth delinquency in Japan, and it's probably why it's common to see bikers as trainers in their earlier Pokemon games. Going back to Simisage, their Pokédex entries often mention how short-tempered and violent they are, which matches the usual Bosozoku member pretty well. Not only that, but the trait of Simisage's line representing Speak No Evil is also fitting, since it's pretty easy to believe that a group of roughhousing bikers would have foul language. The pompadour is even a nice contrast to Simipour's hairstyle, which besides looking like water spewing from a fountain, also resembles a long hairstyle common among hippies. Finally, Simisear resembles a motorbiker, with their shoulder puffs looking like biker jacket puffs, their hands in a position like they're holding handlebars, and even their tail that looks like exhaust fumes. Bikers also tend to be pretty loud with their motorcycles, fitting for a mon going against the value of hearing no evil. I know this seems to overlap a fair amount with Simisage's aesthetical origins, since I also compare them to bikers. However, there are two significant differences between the two that I want to point out. First, Simisage more closely represents the general attitude of Bosozoku members, while Simisear's aesthetic is more focused on the use of motorcycles itself. Second, while Simisage is so ill-tempered, Simisear actually seems the most mild of the trio based on their Pokédex entries, which is fairly subversive for the fire type in a group like this. They remind me a lot more of the mild ones from SpongeBob, who may seem like dangerous bikers at first, but turn out to be not so rough after all.
Give me back my M! Let's go, boys!
Simisear's plump torso might even be a result of how much it apparently likes sweets. You know, the more I think about Simisear, the more I actually like them. I think what I would change about their design is to give them a motorcycle helmet that's attached to their head to give it a more convincing biker aesthetic. It could even have flames coming out of the top, sort of like how Typhlosion has flames coming out of their neck. Now, there is unfortunately no official confirmation from Game Freak that the design choices of these monkeys actually originated from the Japanese Deliquid archetypes that I've referred to, and are only fan theories. However, I still believe it's important to thank the Rogue Renegade for truly being the first person to help me look at the Unova monkeys with a much different perspective than before. That segment in their video inspired me to make this video in the first place, so I truly feel that it's important to give credit where it's due. I've come to appreciate these monkeys much more now than I ever did before researching for this video. I can understand if people think the final stages look over-designed or too awkward, since not everyone will understand origins for a Pokemon's design. I also used to be somewhat questionable of their designs and thought the existence of these monkeys were pretty unnecessary due to the fact that they're another trio of grass, fire, and water lines, but that hasn't really bothered me much anymore since they have lots of neat and creative design elements and origins without making me feel overwhelmed just by looking at them. Maybe adding the dark type to each of the final evolutions will make their typing a bit more interesting and fit with the theme of giving into evil, since the dark type in Pokemon is actually called the evil type in Japan. It just goes to show how much potential I believe the Unova monkeys have, and I really hope they each get new evolutions or mega evolutions in the future. Okay, wait a moment, I have one last compliment for the Unova monkeys. The tails of Pansage, Pansear, and Panpour all resemble the shapes of playing card suits. That's so cool! Bring us the 4th monkey line in the next region to complete the monkey card playing quadrant, Game Freak. Okay, sorry, let's actually move on. Sorry everyone, but I do not like Typhlosion. For quite a few years now, I've generally preferred not to pick the fire type starter when choosing a starter Pokemon, since the fire starter almost always becomes the most popular one of the three, and I've wanted to give more chances to the other two types. But there are still quite a few fire type starters I love. Chimchar in Pokemon Platinum was the first starter I ever chose, since I was obsessed with monkeys when I was very young, and while I'm not really into Chimchar or their evolution Monferno nowadays, I have always thought their final evolution Infernape was badass. I love the Tepig and Fennekin lines for how well they embrace their wrestler and mage themes. The Fuecoco line is just full of creativity, and even though Litten and Torracat suddenly becoming a John Cena style wrestler has always been a pretty jarring shift to me, I've come to appreciate Incineroar on their own for their inclusion in Smash Ultimate and their cool and wacky wrestler style. But Typhlosion's design just hasn't aged well for me. Their expression is totally intimidating, and I love the flame coming out of their neck. We've had fire come off of the bodies of plenty of Pokemon before and after, but hardly do we see such an explosive one like the ones of the Cyndaquil line. Sadly, these cool features only make about 30% of Typhlosion's design, as the rest of it is this big bland badger body with little to no interesting details. And that explosive flame is only active when it's in battle, making this one of the most underwhelming Pokemon I've ever seen when the flame's turned off. It goes to show how detrimental it can be to a Pokemon's design to have one of their key features removed. And yet, I don't think it has to be this way. The legendary Pokemon Xerneas has two forms, one where they're in battle and one when they're outside of battle. The change is purely aesthetic, but even though I love the look of all the pretty lights on the active mode form, I also love the look of the neutral mode, since the light blue parts go so well with the darker blue of the neck fur, and it overall creates such a cool and dormant look for Xerneas. I actually don't know which form I like more. But that's what an alteration of a Pokemon's design should do, not just take away an important part of one's design, but also add something new that benefits the base of the design and makes a new version more unique. It doesn't have to be better or even as good as the predecessor, but it should at least try to stand out more and/or improve on parts of said predecessor. But once Typhlosion's iconic flame is taken away, nothing is added to compensate for it, except for the red marks on their neck where the flames come out, I guess. It really is too bad, since I think Typhlosion's design could easily be improved by adding a cool pattern or something on their underside. As a matter of fact, I went to Google Images to search for fan-made regional variants of Typhlosion, and I really love this fire electric variant of them in their previous evolutions. They have a jagged black fur pattern that covers their legs and a bit more of their underside, and a thick cloud of smoke that pours out all across their back and not just the neck. And oh my goodness, Cyndaquil looks so cute! You see, this and the fan-made Parasect evolution is why Game Freak should hire more staff to help with their Pokemon games, so their team doesn't have to rush as much to get a new Pokemon game out almost every year and have to resort to making Pokemon that hardly change their design when they evolve. Okay, to be fair, this is also the fault of the Pokemon Company and Nintendo for enforcing such strict deadlines in Game Freak in order to have their games released around the same time as Pokemon anniversaries, merchandise, and TV tie-ins and whatnot. It also has to do with the fact that almost every main series Pokemon game sells super well, so there's little to no incentive to improve on the games beyond what is considered passable for the general public. But in order to not make this a bigger tangent than it already is, let's just thank Reddit user P Tickles for the artwork and move on to the next spot. I remember playing Pokemon X and Y for the first time when I was 9 years old, and when I say I played X and Y, I mean it literally. The only main series Pokemon game I played before that was Platinum, an enhanced version of Diamond and Pearl, so I got both X and Y because I didn't understand that Pokemon games usually came in two separate versions of the same game. Anyways, when the time came for me to pick my starter in X, I almost immediately went for Fennekin. Their big ears with a fluffy orange fur that looked like flames was way more appealing to me than the other starters. And I really started to love this fox when they evolved into Braixen, who took on the appearance of a mage. It also felt incredible seeing attacks like Ember and Psybeam in 3D for the first time, after only seeing moves in 2D in the past. Eventually, after my Braixen evolved into Delphox, it was the first Pokemon I ever leveled up all the way to level 100. I think I might have played X and Y too much, but while I loved Delphox, a lot of the internet did not. There's been a long-running controversy within the Pokemon fandom about starter Pokemon nowadays looking too human when they are fully evolved. Some of the biggest targets of criticism include Incineroar, Meowscarada, and definitely Delphox. I've never really had much understanding of this complaint. There have been plenty of Pokemon in the past that have had human-like features in their designs. Sometimes they make me feel uncomfortable, but a lot of the time I think they can really work to the design's advantage and can create a lot of really neat and interesting looking creatures for the world of Pokemon. I think a couple of reasons a lot of Pokemon fans don't like human-like starters nowadays is firstly because starter Pokemon have always been based on animals, and secondly because of how common human-like designs have become compared to earlier generations of starters. Ever since Gen 6, Game Freak has more often chosen themes for the starters of each region to have. The Kalos region starters are themed after RPG character classes, with Chespin becoming a warrior, Froakie becoming a rogue, and Fennekin of course becoming a mage. Later on we have the Galar region starters, which features a drumming gorilla, a football-playing rabbit, and a James Bond-like spy chameleon, probably to give homage to British pop culture. And most recently with the Paldea region, the starters take on the theme of performers, with a masquerade magician cat, a singing crocodile, and a samba dance bird. Not all of these starters really look human-like, at least to me, but enough of them are that I've had to hear Pokemon fans almost constantly complaining about starters looking too human for the past 5 to 6 years. I actually really like the trend of having a trio of starters revolving around a theme, since I think it ties the trio together more and creates a lot more potential for starter designs. I do wish they would take a break from performer designs for at least a gen or two, and theme a trio off of something like types of weapons, or either a real life or mythological creatures that don't get much attention. I actually found a really great collection of fan-made starter Pokemon based off of Australian animals, which really makes me hope a future gen of Pokemon is set in that country, since I would love to see a Platypusmon. But back to Delphox. While even I like Braixen more than Delphox due to Braixen's head to body proportions being a bit more appealing to me, I still love Delphox for their elegant wizard-like appearance, and I've never really been bothered by how humanoid they look. Unlike something like the Incineroar line, where the final evolution is a very abrupt departure from the previous stage's look, Delphox's design feels a bit more natural for their line, since Braixen is already a bipedal fox mage. The same kind of thing goes with the Meowscarada line in my opinion. And here's a double standard that really gets on my nerves. Why do Pokemon fans complain so much about a lot of starters nowadays looking too human, when Blaziken has been generally beloved for so many years? I really like Blaziken, but Delphox and Meowscarada look more like a fox and a cat than Blaziken looks like a chicken. I really don't want to hate on the Pokemon community since there are plenty of nice and respectful people in it, but these past several years have made it really exhausting to be part of it on the internet. I'm just glad I've learned to continue appreciating a lot of the mods I grew up with, and it's definitely true with Delphox. This is the second fire type starter on the negative side of the list, and believe it or not, it's not the last. Scorbunny is a mon I want to like due to their Lions football player theme, but the Lions first stage really suffers from what I like to call generic happiness, where the feelings you have with a character's design is that they're happy, optimistic, and/or nice or something like that, but not really anything else. Scorbunny tries to look determined and adventureful, but just leaves little to no impact on me due to how bland their expression is. I know there are plenty of Pokemon who more often than not look simply happy and nice, but for some reason I don't feel the same way about mons like Pikachu, Eevee, Tepig, and Grookey. Maybe it's because that since Scorbunny and their evolutions are supposed to represent football players, I wish that Scorbunny had a look that made them seem more competitive and reckless like this fan art depicts them, since they're the most immature stage of the line and will be like an excitable young football player. I already like the pads on their nose and feet that resemble bandages. If more official depictions of Scorbunny took on the look I suggested, I think I would like Scorbunny a lot more. I can hardly believe I chose this mon to be on the list of positive entries for this video. I'm gonna get so much controversy for this. But screw it, I can't get enough of Probopass. Debuting in Gen 4, Probopass served as a new evolution of the Compass Pokemon Nosepass from the previous generation. Nosepass's nose functions like a magnet. It always faces north, and Nosepass can raise their magnetism to draw in metal objects to protect themselves from predators. Funnily enough, if two Nosepass get too close to each other, their noses repel each other just like two identical poles of magnets do when they try to join. Then Gen 4 came along and introduced this floating pile of mustachioed metal. When preparing for this video, I already didn't have high hopes for how much people liked Probopass, but holy crap do people not like Probopass. They got the highest percentage of negative votes of any Pokemon on the survey, a percentage somehow higher than that of Simisear, and one that ties with Watchog in terms of negativity. People didn't have much good to say about Probopass either. Listen, I understand that a giant floating head with a supersized snoz and a bushy black mustache is a bizarre design choice for a Pokemon, but I think people underestimate how good we have it when it comes to the fabulousness of Probopass. I am obsessed with how they look since I love mustaches in general, and no other mustachioed mons have one quite like this one. It's fairly fitting as Nosepass is already known for their big nose, and I find the way their evolution expands upon it to be hilarious. Moving on to the magnetic qualities of Probopass, the mustache is actually iron sand attracted by the giant nose which Probopass can use to form rocks to destroy their prey with. And those little flying rocks around them, those are called mini noses, and they act as drones that Probopass can control to attack or even catch opponents. Funnily enough, these drones can get lost and may never come back, so someone in the Pokemon world could be on a walk and see a mini nose randomly float by them, and depending on their knowledge of Probopass, they can either be totally confused by what just happened, or be facepalming at Probopass's unfortunate mistake. Lastly, this Pokemon's magnetic force is so strong that it can break electrical appliances just by being near them, so you better be prepared if you send this thing out in battle, or you can kiss your smartphone goodbye. In the end, I just love Probopass's goofy design, and I find their abilities to be really cool and unique. I know Pokemon designs are what Pokemon fans typically care about and complain about when it comes to them on, but I do really wish people would learn to appreciate Probopass for how funny and interesting they are. I believe that it's a lot easier to hate something that poorly continues or adapts a pre-existing product or a piece of art, rather than something that is bad just on its own. That's kind of the basis for my pick for the top spot of the negative side of the list. Regional forms are a trend that has existed since Generation 7 with Pokemon Sun and Moon, with really neat forms like Alolan Vulpix and Marowak. And later on, Sword and Shield not only brought back this trend, but introduced original evolutions to these regional forms, like Obstagoon and Sirfetch'd. It's overall something I've always genuinely loved, since it's a neat homage to the evolution of real-life animals to adapt to a new environment, and it serves as an opportunity to see familiar Pokemon shown in a whole new way. But of course, not all these forms are created equal. Sometimes a regional form's design can be either confusing, underwhelming, or just plain unappealing, at least to me. Now let's talk about Pokemon Legends Arceus. In this game, the starters you can choose from are not original starters, and instead pre-existing starters from various regions, since this game is set in the Hisui region in the distant past when the Sinnoh region wasn't yet established, and when people are just settling into this uncharted land. The game compensates for this, however, by introducing Hisuian forms with the final evolutions of these starters, which is a first for the series. But one of these three makes me feel more disappointment and disgust than any other regional form does, and unfortunately, that one is Hisuian Typhlosion. Call me a double dipper all you want for targeting Typhlosion twice in the same video, but while I already dislike the original form from the Johto region, I cannot stand their Hisuian form. They get noticeably slimmer, their fierce facial expression is swapped for a more passive expression, and instead of the explosive flame, Typhlosion now has a flowing purple and red flame with a new color for it to come out of. Now, I generally love the flames that come out of ghost types. They really add a lot to the ominous nature of the Pokemon they come out of, since instead of being an intense raging flame, these kinds of flames are usually more subtle, like a candle glowing in the dark. But while I do think Typhlosion's new purple and red flame look neat, almost all I can look over when looking at it is how much I miss the explosive flame that the original form had. It stands out a lot more and is more distracting from Typhlosion's big bland torso. Speaking of which, when Hisuian's Typhlosion's flame is off, combined with her slender body and kooky looking facial expression, this is one of the ugliest things I have ever seen in Pokemon. They look so simultaneously basic and awkward that they kind of hurt to look at for me. And also, it's not like I usually dislike a major change in facial expression for an alternate Pokemon form. Just compare Voltorb and Electro to their Hisuian forms. It's pretty cute and funny to see their expressions swapped, since Electro originally turned Voltorb's round upside down. And despite me seemingly complaining about Hisuian and Typhlosion's expression just now, I actually think it's a neat approach, since it looks friendly but also has the potential to be sinister or mischievous. It's just all this glorified negative space in the middle again, and I really hope I don't have to explain yet again my problem with that. I'm happy for the people who love Hisuian and Typhlosion and think it's a neat adaptation of the original form, but I just want to move on so you don't have to hear me complain about a creature's underside for another minute or two. We've been on a truly emotional journey today when it comes to talking about fire-type starters. I defended Thaaanks with my life, I thoroughly voiced my complaints about Scorbunny and Typhlosion twice, but thankfully we shall end this journey by once again defending a fire starter because Tepig's evolution Pignite desperately needs some positive attention.
Tepig is a perfectly designed, cute pig starter. What the fuck?
I truly did not begin to understand how much people despise this Pokemon until the past year or two. For starters, I think it's important to consider the circumstances of the Tepig line's debut in Generation 5. Back in Gen 3 with Ruby and Sapphire, we were introduced to the fire starter Torchic, who evolved into the firefighting type Combusken and then the iconic Blaziken. It was epic since the firefighting typing is something we had never seen before and Blaziken is still one of the most popular fire starters to this day. In the next gen with Diamond and Pearl we had Chimchar, who evolved to the Monferno and then Infernape. Chimchar's evolutions also happen to be firefighting types, but most people didn't seem to care much about that since they were too busy complaining about the fact that there were only 2 lines of fire types available before the post-game of Diamond and Pearl. So if anything, they were highly encouraged to pick Chimchar as their starter. Then the next gen came out with Black and White, and its fire starter became the 3rd firefighting type in a row. Yeah, this did not go over well with fans, and this line of what was typically the most popular starter type in the past was now one of the biggest hate targets of the 5th generation of Pokemon. I can totally understand the frustration of having 3 firefighting starters in a row, since I remember how enraged I felt when I found out that the final character of the initial DLC Fighters Pass of Smash Ultimate was another Fire Emblem character when we'd already had 7 in the past. But I really don't want to spend time getting into the details of that now since this isn't a Smash Bros video, so go watch this video by Shafrillis Productions to learn more, since I agree with most of his points. The thing is though, I wasn't mad about Pignite and Emboar's typing like most of the Pokemon fandom when they were introduced, because I was 7 years old and still spending most of my time playing Pokemon Platinum when Black and White came out, so I've never had that bad memory about these 2 months that a lot of others had. But there's something about Pignite that I feel much more passionate about defending, and that's their design. I believe Pignite achieves what is a very tricky thing to do, and that is striking a good balance between looking cute and cool. They begin the wrestling theme further expanded upon by their evolution by getting a wrestler singlet, which Pignite just looks adorable in. That coupled with them flexing their biceps and the bright confident look on their face, Pignite truly has the look of a young and aspiring wrestler. I also love their rotund body type since it not only represents how big pigs can get when they get older, but also the beefiness of professional wrestlers. Compare this design to something like Quilladin, the 2nd stage of the grass starter from the Kalos region. I hate looking at this thing. Chessman's eyes go from being cute white dots in a black void to getting white rings around them, and they become extremely unsettling to look at least for me. Like Pignite, Quilladin has a very round body, probably intended to resemble the shape of a chestnut. However, it's pretty inconsistent with the body types of the rest of the stages in their line. There are quite a few other middle stage mons that do this, like Silcoon, Swadloon, and Shelgon, but the point of those designs is that they are cocoons that serve as a transition from their larval form to their adult form. Quilladin is not a cocoon. I actually think Chestnut looks pretty cool, even though their color scheme is quite a departure from their previous evolutions. I just have trouble taking them more seriously since Quilladin kind of killed the momentum of the line for me for being such an awkward looking middle stage evolution. But I believe the same is definitely not true with Pignite. Not only do I actually love their design, but their bulky wrestler form is greatly expanded upon with their evolution Emboar, who has a fiery ring around their neck and a black ring of fur that I think looks like a belt worn by a champion wrestler. Yes, I know that it's actually based on the pattern of ancient Chinese cauldrons known as dings, but the fact that I could make this neat of an observation of Emboar's design without knowing what dings are goes to show how well made the designs of Emboar and their previous evolutions are. But let's see what some of the Pokemon in my survey said about Pignite. Looks too much like it's wearing clothes, a vest. I feel like he needs to put some clothes on, reminds me of a wrestler. Starter middle stage evolution curse. It's fine, like any middle stage starter, it's meant to look somewhat awkward. Pignite just doesn't have the personality or cool factor that Servine and Dewott have. What makes it distinct? Just dang. It's okay to not understand or like aspects of a mon's design, but I just don't understand why seemingly so many people miss the point of Pignite's design or think it looks dumb or generic. I do somewhat believe in the starter middle stage evolution curse, since some of them feel more like awkward transitions to the final evolution instead of stages that stand out in a really cool way. But the same should not apply to Pignite, since I consider it a great transition to their final evolution as well as a great standout design. And their fire fighting typing has never truly gotten in the way of my appreciation for them either. It is also important to note that one of the responses to Pignite read, "I love how energetic and optimistic it looks." So thanks to the person who said that. Nowadays, I'm really glad that Tepig has been chosen as one of the 3 starters of Pokemon Legends ZA, since it really feels like this line has been given another chance in the spotlight and isn't held back from being a 3rd fire fighting type starter in 3 generations. As of making this video, Pokemon Legends ZA is finally released, along with the Mega Evolutions of its starters, and I gotta say, I think Mega Emboar looks pretty good. Meanwhile, despite being disappointed in the other 2 starters as Megas for different reasons, I do appreciate them being chosen as starters for this new Legends game in general, since I really think Chikorita also deserves another chance after being so underperforming in their home region. And even though having Totodile in the trio feels like double dipping into the Johto region starters, I think I'm fine with it overall, since it's probably more satisfying to complete the return of one region's group of starters, rather than bringing a starter from a region previously unrepresented in the Pokemon Legends game starters and not bringing back Totodile until a future Legends game. Who am I kidding? Most Pokemon fans can never be satisfied.
Where is Kakuna, Game Freak?
Anyways, thank you very much for watching and listening to my opinions all the way through. As always, these are just my unpopular opinions that you do not have to agree with, even though it's also totally cool if you do, and I would love to hear about what Pokemon you think are overrated or underrated in the comments below. Hope you have a nice rest of your day.